When I was 18 and in college, I met my dad's best friend, Harold. From the beginning, he treated me with blatant disrespect, and I quickly realized that he had a pattern of making condescending remarks. Upon learning that I was studying medicine, he made a snide comment about my ambition, saying, "Oh, so you think you can save the world? How cute, a little 18-year-old who thinks she can change things." My dad laughed at this comment, brushing it off as humor, but I felt humiliated. Every time I encountered Harold, his insults continued. He would mock my clothing choices, belittle the books I read, and even made a crass comment about my past in volleyball, suggesting I only liked the sport for the tight outfits. Despite this ongoing ridicule, my dad never defended me, which made me feel even more isolated. The situation escalated to the point where, during a family barbecue, Harold physically pushed me out of the way while saying I didn't know how to cook. That was the final straw for me. I made a conscious decision to avoid him for the next 6 years. Recently, I attended my dad's girlfriend's birthday party with my fiancée and our 6-month-old son. Harold was also there, and to my dismay, he continued his pattern of condescension. After my son woke up hungry and I went to breastfeed him, Harold began making jokes about my parenting, questioning my ability to be a good mother. His comments were laced with sarcasm, and he even suggested that I should consider giving my baby up for adoption. At that moment, I lost my composure. I shouted at him, asking how he could possibly judge my parenting when his ex-wife had full custody of his own child. In a fit of anger, I exposed a secret I had about him, that he had tried to sleep with his brother's girlfriend. I told him he needed to lose some weight, insisting that no woman would want him with his appearance. After this confrontation, I left the party with my fiancée and son. On the drive home, my dad began texting me, demanding I return and apologize to Harold. I refused, asking my dad if he was aware of the awful things Harold had said to me over the years. He seemed oblivious, yelling back that Harold had only offered to make me a sandwich, which struck me as absurd. It turned out my dad had been in the bathroom during my confrontation with Harold and hadn't heard any of the insults. When I pointed this out, my dad insisted on calling Harold to hear his side of the story. I told him to call Harold himself to find out what had really happened, knowing my dad often sided with Harold without listening to my experiences. After my dad's call with Harold, he told me that Harold claimed he was just concerned for me, trying to look out for me as a new mom. I knew better than to believe Harold's apologies or justifications. My dad suggested I should forgive Harold and apologize for my outburst, stating it was a misunderstanding. He failed to grasp the severity of Harold's consistent disrespect. I explained to my dad that my feelings toward Harold were not exaggerated, and that the comments about my parenting were just the latest in a long line of condescension. I reminded him of all the insults I had endured, but he couldn't recall any specifics. I made it clear that my disdain for Harold was not new, and that I wouldn't apologize for defending myself. I also set a firm boundary. I wouldn't attend any events where Harold was present. I understood that my dad might still want to maintain his friendship with Harold, but I refused to be around him any longer. I told my dad that if Harold was invited to family gatherings, I would leave, and if my dad lied about Harold's attendance, I would not hesitate to walk out. My dad called me dramatic, but I pointed out that I had been avoiding Harold for 6 years, and clearly, it had not been a big issue for anyone. I also asserted that I didn't have to like my dad's friends any more than he had to like mine. After a lengthy discussion, my dad begrudgingly accepted my terms. In the following days, my dad mentioned that Harold was upset about our confrontation, but I chose to ignore that. Although I was not cutting ties with my dad entirely, our relationship remained strained. Moving out had given me space, and since we saw each other only a few times a month, it felt manageable. My dad's lack of attention to my feelings was evident, as he didn't seem to care about the impact of Harold's comments on me. He was often too distracted by his own life to notice the pain I experienced. After our confrontation, I realized that I needed to focus on raising my child differently than my dad had raised me. I also encouraged my dad to seek therapy, especially after I became pregnant. While our relationship is still rocky, I feel empowered to prioritize my own well-being and that of my son, learning from the mistakes my dad made in his relationships, especially concerning how he treated me. Back in June, my dad finally started going to therapy. After years of being emotionally distant and failing to defend me in difficult situations, particularly with his best friend Harold, this marked a significant change. His behavior has notably improved, especially toward me and my younger sister, who still splits her time between our divorced parents. I made it clear to him early on that if he ever stopped attending therapy, he wouldn't be allowed near my son. For the first time in my life, I'm seeing real progress in my dad's behavior. Although it's difficult to be overly optimistic, I'm trying to remain hopeful. If I ever decide to cut ties with my dad, it won't be because of Harold. Thankfully, I no longer have to pretend to tolerate or hide things regarding Harold. Although my relationship with my dad is still rocky, I've come to terms with focusing on the things that matter most: my son, my fiancé, and my career. And I don't intend for that to change anytime soon. Avoiding Harold has been going well. My dad has been respecting the boundaries I set regarding Harold's presence at family gatherings. Whenever my husband and I are invited over for lunch or dinner, I always ask who else will be there, and so far, my dad has been honest with me. If Harold is invited, my dad lets me know, and he hasn't lied about it once. He also doesn't push back when I decline to attend if Harold will be present. Since my last post, I've only seen Harold once, and that was at my dad's birthday party a few months ago. I knew Harold would be there, but my dad promised that Harold wouldn't speak to me. Additionally, some of my dad's friends' children, who I used to babysit and love spending time with, would be there as well, and I wanted to see them. I spent most of the party with the kids and my son, and Harold didn't speak to me at all. So my dad kept his word. At one point, though, my husband and I noticed Harold staring at us from across the room. I chose to ignore it, but I saw my husband stare back at Harold. My husband, the sweet guy that he is, actually managed to look quite intimidating. I love him even more for that. The only uncomfortable interaction I had at the party wasn't even with Harold. It was with his girlfriend. Yes, he somehow has a girlfriend now. She came over twice during the party. The first time, she made a comment about my son, saying he needed a haircut. I thought to myself, great start. Later, she came up to me again and said, "You're shy, aren't you?" I told her no, but she laughed and said, "Yeah, you're shy," as if she were talking to a child. I bit my tongue and held back my reaction, but I really wanted to tell her that I wasn't shy. I simply preferred spending time with the kids because they were better company than she and Harold. Based on these interactions, I concluded that Harold's girlfriend is just as unbearable as he is. In that sense, they're a perfect match. There's not much else to say about Harold for now. My dad broke up with the woman he was dating last year and has since started seeing someone new. I actually like his new girlfriend. She's neither annoying nor overbearing like his previous one. But I don't think their relationship will last more than a year. In terms of my relationship with my dad, it's not perfect, but it's getting better. He's been apologizing more often, which is a surprise. I don't know if it's the therapy or if motherhood has somehow made me more intimidating in his eyes, but I'll take it. To be fair, he's a really good grandfather, and I appreciate that. I'm also grateful that he's been respecting my boundary when it comes to Harold, because, frankly, I don't want Harold in my life anymore. A few months went by, and things were going well. My dad was sticking to the boundaries I had set regarding Harold, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't dreading family events. My fiancé, son, and I were able to attend dinners and have a genuinely good time without any issues. I thought I was finally done dealing with Harold, but then came my dad's birthday. It was supposed to be a simple dinner, and as always, I made sure to ask if Harold would be there. My dad reassured me that Harold wasn't invited, which made me feel relieved because I didn't want to deal with him. The evening started off well. My dad was in high spirits, his girlfriend was being sweet, and I was enjoying catching up with family and friends. A few hours into the party, however, guess who walked through the door? Harold, and he was drunk. I gave my dad a look, and he seemed just as surprised as I was. It turned out that my dad hadn't invited Harold. He had found out about the party from someone else and decided to show up unannounced. Harold was obnoxious, loud, and making everyone uncomfortable. I stayed away from him, focusing on my son and chatting with friends. My plan was to leave early if Harold became too much, but as the night went on, he only got worse. He made snide comments, mostly directed at my dad, but I could feel his eyes on me the entire time. At one point, I overheard Harold drunkenly say to my dad, "You should have brought someone else's kid instead of hers. At least then you'd have a chance at decent grandkids." I froze. My first instinct was to scream at him, but instead I stayed calm and focused on my son and fiancé, hoping Harold would just stop. But things took a dangerous turn when my dad was at the grill. Harold, in his drunken state, decided to take over. He shoved my dad out of the way, knocking the entire tray of food onto the ground. Everyone was staring, waiting for someone to react. My dad, however, tried to laugh it off, as if Harold was just being Harold. That was the final straw for me. I stormed over to Harold and yelled at him, telling him he needed to leave. He smirked at me like it was all a joke and said, "Oh, little miss knows best, huh? You think you're all grown up now with your perfect little family." That was it. I snapped. I told Harold I was done with him, and that he had been an arrogant, disgusting jerk for years. I made it clear that I would no longer let him treat me or my family that way. I demanded that he leave immediately. Harold just stood there, stunned, without even trying to defend himself. For the first time in my life, my dad finally stood up for me. He told Harold, "You need to leave now." Harold was shocked and tried to laugh it off, but my dad didn't budge. He repeated, "Leave, Harold. You've crossed too many lines, and you're not welcome here anymore." Harold stumbled out of the party, and my dad turned to me and apologized. This time, I could tell my dad was serious. He admitted that he had been wrong to let Harold get away with his behavior for so long, and for the first time, he chose me over his friend. It wasn't just empty words either. My dad hasn't spoken to Harold since that night. This is the whole story. After years of dealing with Harold's harassment and my dad's indifference, things have finally changed. My relationship with my dad is still a work in progress, but I'm relieved that I no longer have to endure Harold's presence. I can finally focus on my own family and move forward with peace.